Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 205. Today's topic, characters living on the edge. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome
to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the milk of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And hanging by my fingertips on the edge, I am Michael Miller.
Or falling off horribly years ago, Michael Miller. And yes, this is the show where we like to talk about world building, and one of those big parts of world building, one of those things that really adds the real detail, the real aroma to your world are characters. To me, that's like the most fundamental part of world building. You know, I could take a character and build a world from a character if the character was good enough.
And a lot of times you are presented with a world through the eyes of a character like the ones we're talking about today. There's a lot of main characters that fit this description. Characters like...
And a lot of villains, too.
Yeah. True. Characters like Spike Spiegel. Characters like Mad Max.
Yes. Deadpool, one of my personal favorites. Batman, you could argue, is in this realm.
I would give you Batman. I would give you Batman. But it's fun to... my point is that it's fun to see a world through those characters.
And so... we're talking about characters on the edge. I kind of like to think of it on both sides because people often think about the anti-hero, but there's also, conversely, the anti-villain. The villain who either is accidentally a villain or he's a villain because, he's maybe gone a step or too far. It's like if Batman would start killing the people, like really killing them, he could become a serial killer. So, I'd argue those characters are villains, even if they are the protagonists. Like, I would argue Dexter is a villain, even though he's doing it to other villains. But still,
we're not there.
That's cutting hairs.
We're not there yet. But tomorrow, at the time of this recording, The Punisher drops on Netflix. By the time you listen to this, The Punisher will have been out for like a month, and The Punisher is a great example because
hopefully you're not listening to this.
By all accounts, according to the police, the Punisher is a bad guy. But if you ask me, Punisher's a good guy.
Well, he's one very much like Deadpool in my book.
He straight up murders a lot of people. I don't know that I would put him and Deadpool in the same camp.
I would put them in the same camp as where they use criminal activities to achieve their hero ends. So I would say yes, they are. Okay. Deadpool originally was more of a villain, I think. He had more periods of time as a villain.
When they first created him, I think he was more created visually than with a whole lot of story, and I think he just developed to what he is now. Because when he was first created, he was kind of a throwaway character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost definitely. He was someone who wanted to draw Deathstroke literally, but was in the wrong company.
Yeah, that was it was either Lee or Liefeld. I can't remember.
It was Rob Liefeld.
It was Rob Liefeld. I thought it was, but I wasn't 100% sure.
But so I like to talk about on both spectrums. So, as we go through the types, we're going to sort of give the anti-hero version, and then in my own way, along the same vein, the anti-villain version. So, like I said, it's a fine hair splitting them on what really is an anti-hero or an anti-villain, because there's a mixture of good and evil. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about why they really work well, why these characters work well. I mean, they really do. They're awesome types of characters. All your characters can't be them, but they're characters that people can really, really connect to. And so, like I said, we'll talk about the good and the evil. So now for the types. There's the I need to survive anti-hero. This could be someone in like Walking Dead, zombie survival type shows or video games spurn up anti-heroes because a lot of times they're forced to act really and maybe even sometimes barely cross the line, but it's for a really good reason, or if they go too far, they turn into the I just do what it takes to get it done person. The world's hard. Yeah, the difference between me and the anti-hero is I'm honest enough to do it all of the time. That's sort of the fine line to me.
Would you call the does what it takes a ends justify the means type of character?
No, that's a completely different.
Okay.
That's a completely different.
You actually have something like that down there. I just noticed.
Means to an end is a different anti. But like I said, these things are all very fine lines.
Means to an end and ends justify the means
are two different things.
I was going to say, for me, those are different.
Those are the opposite.
Yeah.
And so you just said what should have been the verses on that one. So we'll skip to that one next, right?
Sure.
You have the means versus the means to the end anti-hero, which is, my means are wrong. This is definitely your Punisher. This is maybe Deadpool. I'm not sure. Deadpool could fit into several of these categories depending on what mood he's in. But it's my means, like I might be a cold-blooded murderer, but I'm, my end is to destroy all organized crime because it's a plague destroying innocent lives every day.
Yeah, that is the Punisher. Absolutely. Off of that one, you have intentions gone wrong, which I would say that's the villain type, where you have a character who has a good intention, but it gets corrupted along the way, and they get caught up in the means as opposed to the ends.
Exactly. They lose the ends, or the ends end up justifying the means. Isn't quite the same thing. It's really more they had the means in place, and they had a plan to get to the end. They just lost the end.
Yeah.
Their intentions have twisted and become something wrong. And it might not even be... might not realize it. Like my favorite character here is when Hal Jordan combined with Parallax and created a massive Marvel crossover Destructo thing. But the point was, he was creating it was the classic lawful evil character where, he had gone from lawful good to lawful evil because it was like nothing he did could have saved people he had lost. So he decided to start using at first the means to get to the positive end, but then the end became to just control people, because if they all did what I tell them to and acted correctly, they won't. The universe wouldn't be in any trouble.
If you could,
everything would be happy.
Just see what I see. One of my favorite ones of those that is it's not identical, but it reminds me of it greatly. Is if you ever read Red Sun. Did you ever read Red Sun?
Red Sun.
That
name's familiar.
Red Sun is an extremely classic Superman tale where Superman did not land in Kansas. He landed in the Ukraine. He grows up Russian during the height of the Iron Curtain.
Ooh.
And what happens is they eventually get to the point where it's like Superman is a totalitarian ruler. And really, it's like, it's my way because I know best. If you just knew what I knew, you'd get it. And Luthor undoes him. Luthor's a good guy in this story. Because he's one of the smartest men on the planet. And he undoes Superman with an intellectual argument. And the argument the argument is, why don't you just put the world in a bottle? Because Kandahar's in a bottle, and since you completely control Kandahar, like, why not control, and you're completely trying to control the Earth by just your perspective, then why don't you just put us in a bottle, because we don't need our free will anymore? And it's great, and it's a great example of where you
it flipped it.
Yeah, you've got that character who would be a good guy. And while they didn't transfer him from good guy to bad guy, I would say, I would argue that they did, because certainly he always thought he was a good guy. And he was basically truth, justice, and the American way, except for Russia, until he got to a point where he was a military leader, and then the country's leader, and then the world leader.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you're too far gone.
Yeah, and I would argue, and he's been played several different ways, but one of the common ways Lex Luthor gets played is an intentions gone wrong character. Because usually he has good intentions where he's in his mind trying to save the world from aliens or from something or from Superman directly.
He's very commonly
he's not
trying to save the world from Superman. A lot of people,
I've seen him a few times played more like a kingpin where he wouldn't fall in the anti-hero realm. But I think many times an anti-villain realm. I think many times, and most of his best appearances are he's an anti-villain where he's an intentions gone wrong kind of anti-villain.
I totally agree with you. I think one of the best examples of Luthor is what they did with him in Smallville. Like, he was a good guy for a long time in Smallville, but he was like, the ends justify the means. And it slowly and slowly and slowly got worse and worse and worse until he becomes like more like the Luthor that we generally see, where there, in my opinion, there's two Luthors, and I think a lot of people know the wrong one. They know the Kingpin version. A lot of people know the Kingpin version, the Kevin Spacey and the Gene Hackman versions that we got in the movies, where he is a megalomaniac and selfish. And he has his perspective, and this is what I want for the world, but more importantly, it's going to be for me. Whereas the better Luthor, in my opinion, is ones that we've seen in the cartoons and certainly in a lot of the better stories in the comic books, where he is what you're talking about, where it's just a perspective that has been pushed to an extreme, and it's been twisted just enough to make him the villain, even though he had the best of intentions to begin with.
Which is kind of good too,
or maybe not the best of intentions, but certainly not intentionally bad.
In his mind, they were the best of intentions.
Yeah.
They just weren't necessarily. Other people would not necessarily identify them the same way.
Yeah,
No, I agree. And now this next one's one of my favorites because there's two stories I have in mind with this one, and I'll mention them both very quickly when I go through it. The next one is the anti-hero is it's in my nature. This is just who I am, versus the anti-villain, which is I must control nature. And to me, that is...
Control one's nature?
It could be control one's nature, their own nature, everyone else's nature. But it's always a control side that sort of takes over nature.
Okay.
And the two ones, and the first one is pretty good. The second one's better. The first one is the because it's the anti-villain and anti-hero in the same story.
Yep.
The first one's Moby Dick. The whale is the anti-hero, and the Captain Ahab is the anti-villain. And the second one, which I think is an even better representation of it because there's words for both sides, is Frankenstein and Dr. Frankenstein.
Oh, there you go.
Because obviously Victor is the monster.
Yes, Frankenstein's monster versus Victor.
Even though I would say many people would consider him a classic villain, I consider him an anti-villain because once again, it was this idea of he's trying to do something that's good ultimately. It's just his desire to control nature basically causes him to do horrific things.
Frankenstein versus Electric Zombie.
Boogaloo. That would be a good... That's true. He was like the first zombie fiction.
First electric zombie. Let's be specific. Because there's been plenty...
That's true. There are definitely been zombie-like things
There's plenty of undead.
Since mythology.
Yeah, there's plenty of undead out there. So, but
that's fair enough.
Electric zombie.
Okay.
Cannot become versus creature of circumstance. Now, tell me about cannot become. Because I'll bet I've got a ton of good examples for a lot of these, but you wrote these, so we probably should have.
I wrote them in a way that made sense to me. Yeah. And the first one is cannot become. It's to me. This is Batman. This is bad stuff has happened to me, and I'm forced to do something good out of it because of that. But because of what happened to me, it draws me towards the darkness. But I can't become the thing that created me.
Okay. You got an example?
Batman to me. I mean, this is where Batman is. He was created in this horrific moment when his parents are killed.
Oh, okay.
Which sends him down this behavior to become Batman, but he's always at the edge where it would just be simpler if I just killed them.
Did you say Batman while you were talking about the example because the audio cut out on me?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yep.
So if you want to cut me asking about Batman and that...
Don't worry about it.
All right.
If it needs to get cut, it will. Okay.
Creature of Circumstance. I would say you could even throw the Joker there. I mean, the Joker's going to fit in a few of these, but you could call him a creature of circumstance.
Certain Jokers do approximate
certain Jokers. That's a better way to say it. Certain Jokers.
And that's who I was actually thinking of here, because I was also Batman versus, because in a lot of these I could see them in the same story.
Yeah.
A lot of times they work really well in stories where you have both the antagonist and protagonist in these roles.
I've got a better one.
The creature of circumstances, the Joker was, and this is also something you could argue this is my nature versus I must control. But the Joker, he was a victim of circumstances. We'll say he fell into the vat or however creation story you want to add to him there, but that causes him to do bad things. He wasn't even necessarily a bad person before it started, but since the transformation, he's become a creature of his circumstances. He's just doing what he needs to.
I got a better one. I got a better one for creature of circumstance. Riddick in Pitch Black, and I say that very specifically because Riddick
in the first one,
yes, they change that character around a lot. They change his story a lot throughout the course of the movies, but the character still kind of stays the same. In the first movie, I would definitely say that fits him well because he talks about, he alludes to, rather, he doesn't necessarily talk about very specifically, but he alludes to his history. And we get little pieces.
And he was a bad guy.
And he was a very bad guy, straight up murderer. Like there's a part where Johns, who's the police officer, or you think he turns out to be a mercenary, who has brought him into custody, is like, this guy's a murderer and he's going to prison. He's due his justice, and he's trying to talk about. They get in a circumstance where now Johns needs Riddick and his strength and his proficiency to help keep him alive and help keep the other people alive, but he knows that some people aren't going to make it. So he's like, we're going to be the ones who decide who lives and dies out here. On the battlefield, they call it triage. And he goes, they kept calling it murder when I did it.
Yeah.
And Riddick is very aware of what he does, but it seems like he gets put in a circumstance, and because he's the strongest one, he's the one that lives. So he's the creature of circumstance. And in this circumstance, what he ends up doing is heroic. It's not what he would generally choose to do. And as a matter of fact, there's multiple parts in the movie where he chooses to do things that are not heroic. Yeah. But there are some things that he does that happen to be heroic because it saves other people by circumstance.
Yes.
So Riddick, I would say, is a good example. And guys, if you haven't watched Pitch Black, you could watch the Chronicles of Riddick, the second movie. It's got its moments, but they do some weird stuff to the character in that one, which I don't like. And the third movie, that's just called Riddick, is great. And the video games.
Oh, I didn't see that. I didn't realize that they actually had.
Yeah, they made a third one, and it's very good. It's very good.
Pitch Black is one of my favorite monster space movies.
Riddick is a big callback to Pitch Black.
Mm-hmm. Oh, awesome!
Yeah, it's really, really good.
And to be honest, Vin Diesel in almost every movie I've seen, I've enjoyed. I mean. And it's a simple delight, and I've not seen the Fast and the Furious movies, but the ones where he's the sort of action star, I've seen a lot of them, and a lot of times, the writing is questionable, and the plot complexity is not high, but I just enjoy his delivery. So
he was one of the driving forces behind the video game. I can't remember which one was first. There's Escape from Butcher's Bay, and I think Escape from Butcher's Bay was first. And that is the story that is the precursor to Pitch Black.
Oh, okay.
And he was a driving force to getting that video game made, and I believe it was made by... I think he owns a stock in Trigun Games. Like, he might own part of that company, or it might be his. But that video game was an excellent story. And, Good stuff.
All right. Now, the next one, these are the lordly versions. There are the noble character suppressed. This is, I can't really think of one of these off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Noble
but
character suppressed.
This would be typically someone in a position of power, like a sheriff or like a lord, even up to like a king or whatever. Someone who has power over those around them, and on the outside they do good deeds. And they do what's best for the people, but they have this inner nature, this desire to do the most horrific things, and they're fighting to suppress it.
Okay.
So they're always fighting against the evil in their nature, suppressing it, and it will splurge out at times, but in general, they keep it enough under wraps to where they're remembered as this good and noble character.
Yeah, I wish I could think of an example of this because this feels very familiar.
Yeah, and as I was thinking about it, there was someone in my brain, but and the other one, there are lots of good examples of this, and I call this the Marquis, sort of in homage to the Marquis de Sade, a lovely human being. But the idea here is where they have noble character aspirations, they have that feel to them, and some of their intentions might not be bad, but ultimately it's all about them and their excesses. And to me, the biggest one here is the Godfather. He does lots of great things in his community, but ultimately it's about him getting rich, and he'll kill people to do it.
Now, let's be specific, though. Would you say that is more his father than Michael Corleone?
And him at the beginning, he tries to become an anti-hero, and that's like his struggle. The Pacino version, but definitely his father. And most gangsters, I think, most classic gangsters have that feel to them as well too, where it's like, we do good things in the community to help keep the community on our side, but ultimately it's about selling the liquor or doing things to enrich ourselves. And it's our excesses that we're trying to feed. We do the noble things as part of that. So it's that fine line of where do you stop suppressing it enough, where you lose that ability to put others in front of you, you turn more villain than hero.
What was the whole thing? You either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Exactly.
One of my friends on Facebook recently used that analogy in reference to drinking, and they said you either pass out the hero or you drink long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I'm just like, I think I'm pretty much the villain all the time. I think I've only passed out from drinking like 2 or 3 times in my life.
Yeah.
So, villain. The next one you got here is Extreme Advocate versus Magneto, which I love it. I love this one, so go for it.
And I just used him specifically because that's exactly the perfect personification of the villain version of this. To me, the Extreme Advocate version would be like Cable.
Okay,
very questionable means. But it's to further the purpose is to protect. It's the protection of the team, the type of people who are like,
and also the protection of the future. He's really a safeguard of the future.
Yes, for his kind specifically, but even further to all people on Earth, where Magneto becomes so focused and myopic on his people at this time, that's why he's a villain, and he sometimes crosses over to anti-hero, but is 99% of the time just the villain.
Yeah,
because ultimately, humans, maybe I don't always want to kill them, but sometimes I do. And other times I fight with it. But
the irony is that he is a concentration camp survivor. Mm-hmm. And by the time he gets to the peak of his power and his zealot, he very much wants to do what Hitler was doing. He wants to exterminate humans. Not just certain people, like all of non-mutants. He wants to exterminate.
And obviously at that point, he's well beyond anti-villain.
Yeah,
but yes.
yeah, because he sees himself and the rest of mutant kind as the next natural stage of evolution, and that they belong and they deserve to live, and humans don't. And that is a terrifying thought. Someone that powerful with that, with that perspective, and he's got some astounding stories too. Like there's a really good one where the Avengers have him locked up for a while, and he shuts down. There's actually multiple stages of terror in the story. He basically uses his powers to shut down the power in the area of the building that they also have the Hulk locked up in. And then he uses that for him to escape. And when they talk about the Hulk escaping, they talk about how he eats like 2 of the nurses. They're like, what happened to Bob and Karen? The nurses on staff, and they're like, he ate them. They're like, the Hulk ate them. He's like, yes, he ate them. The vegetarian Bruce Banner. But some of the things the comic books do with the Hulk, I find so much more interesting. Like, imagine that. Like, he's not just a big strong brute. Like, he ate 2 people. Like, in a manner of like in the matter of a time it took him to bash through and escape this prison they'd been holding him in. And mind you, they'd been holding him in as Banner, and what Magneto did set off the Hulk. He raged out, and in the escape, he ate 2 full humans.
They were delicious, though.
Yeah. And then he went on this rampage across New York trying to find Betty, and he had intentions of doing what the Hulk's version of making love to Betty would be.
Oh. So I'm assuming they did not find her.
No, because the funny jokes they made on that one is she was actually on a date with Freddie Prinze Jr. at the time. So they were like, Freddie, we got to get you on a helicopter and get you out of here. If the Hulk gets here,
you're doomed.
Because he knows you 2 were on a date. It was publicized. So, but getting back to the extreme advocate, though, the other side of Magneto, who would be the extreme advocate on your? I think of Cable here. That's right. You did say Cable. Say Cable.
The militant version of Professor Xavier. Because at first I was thinking Professor Xavier, but he's more your paladin. He's not really.
Yeah, he's pretty much a good guy.
He doesn't fight that line. To me, Cable is him because he's a team leader. So it's about team, and then it's about mutants, and then it's also about humans.
Unit Corps, God Country.
Yes, exactly. So you kind of need those different levels for it to be an advocate style anti-hero, a villain version, or else you're like you go back to something like it's a survival thing, because it's not really just a survival thing for Cable. It has to have there has to be a bigger meaning behind it, and then you kind of fall into this advocate phase. And now this next one, I really love the name because it would make sense to no one but me.
No, this one makes sense to me, believe it or not.
Oh, it did? Okay. Yeah. And it's because as the anti-hero versus because the anti-hero.
Right.
and this is just because of where you're at. And the greatest representation of this anti-hero in my mind is if you've seen the BBC new version of Sherlock Holmes called Sherlock. He's a sociopath who is the good guy because, he's decided to solve crime and work for the police. If he was not, he would be Moriarty, which is not the anti-version of this, unfortunately, because he's truly a despicable thing. But it's just because he's a sociopath, but just because he's a good guy because he's decided to be.
That's almost you could almost go with Dexter. Dexter, I also feel falls into.
Dexter could fall in here.
I feel he also falls into multiple categories because
he falls into multiple. Yep.
If you take a look, this is when it comes to creating a character, and I've said this before, but one of my favorite things about if I'm going to create an important character, especially if it is going to be my protagonist, you got to realize that people have contradictions built into their personality. Mm-hmm. Their feelings might contradict their desires. Their religious perspective might totally go against their politics. Mm-hmm. So you have contradictions are totally cool. They happen all the time. I guarantee you, if you examine some of your thoughts and opinions on the world, you'll find contradictions, mm-hmm. and that's okay. So having that in characters, I think, is important, especially in like those main characters. So you have like, I don't know, I'm trying to think. Oh, well, getting back to Dexter, he's definitely a bad guy. He plans out and murders people. Mm-hmm. Now, the people he murders are always murderers. He mm-hmm. kills really bad people. So he also falls into the ends justify the means, because he's making the world a better place by removing these other predators.
I kind of think of him, too, as in the cannot become, because he doesn't want to be a serial killer of innocent people.
Yes.
So definitely. He forces himself to turn his desires on evil people.
And I also would call him control I must control my nature, because he knows who he is, but he wants to guide it. So mm-hmm. much so that his best advocate of guidance is his father, and when his father dies, he develops a split personality version of his father that continues to guide him on that path. So, yeah, definitely.
And now for the anti-villain version of because it's just because, right?
Just because.
And to me, this is... I can't think of any of the names, but I've seen so many of them. It's ridiculous. You see these in Westerns a lot. It is your gunslinger who gets pulled into like a range war or something like that on what he thinks is probably the good side, comes to realize he's on the wrong side, but feels honor bound to stay there because he said he would. He gave his word. And he could have very easily been on the other side of the fight, but because of... And he might not even take the job if he knew that they were the bad guys. But because he got pulled in on the bad guys' team, he stays there to the end and gets shot by the hero. Who's probably anti-hero.
I would also say that would fall under creature of circumstance, too.
That could be a creature of circumstance, too. Yeah. Yep. But it's the type of circumstance. It's now, because you're working for the bad guys. Because you're working for the good guys. That's why it's a because.
Would you also call a because, like, say, a John Wick? Where John Wick did horrible things. He was an assassin. Then he stopped doing it. And then somebody blew up his house and killed his dog, and he got back in, at which point this is where the anti-hero play comes in, because he kills a bunch of bad guys.
Yeah, most definitely. He falls into this category. And you can argue on either side.
Yeah. And he kills a bunch of bad guys just because. And I would say in the second movie, he is more on the other side of it, because he kills a person who doesn't need to die. That's
why I put him more in the creature of circumstance category, because for me, the thing that makes it a because character is because of who you're working with. It's not because, it's like if you're an assassin.
Well, he's kind of trapped in the second one. He's trapped in the second one. He's trapped in.
And it could be, but once it makes the act of evil to an innocent person is definitely villain. Or at least that moment.
It's definitely an act of evil, but it's against a bad person. But this person
it's means to an end at that moment.
But this person is innocent in this circumstance. So.
That's the great thing about this, is because it's on the edge. This is one of the greatest discussion topics to have with people. Go up to a Punisher fan and tell them the Punisher's a villain, and you can make an argument for why he's a villain. No Punisher fan thinks he's the villain. No, he's the good guy.
He's the anti-hero. That's exactly what the Punisher is. He's an anti-hero.
Now these last types I have here, I think are fun, because you see these a lot, especially in sort of heist movies or in good action movies with thievy type of characters. It's the hand in the till hero, or the till's the target villain. And these are the guys who are the hand the till guys. Like, well, I just came here, I saved your town, and sure, I just cleaned out your cash register, but hey, I just saved you.
That would be Clint Eastwood in A Fistful of Dollars, and in A Few Dollars More, and
in most of his westerns,
and Bruce Willis in Last Man Standing, because that is a remake.
That's true, and I forgot that is a really good movie though. But yeah,
it's a good movie. It's not a really good
no, I mean,
but it's a remake.
See, we mean different things when we say that.
Yeah,
when I say a really good movie, I mean it's really enjoyable to me. So not necessarily the best movie ever made, which is typically how you define that, I believe. And now the till and the target, the difference is
I usually clarify.
The till and the target is slightly different. He's the guy who goes along to do the good things, but he's doing them as a means to his end, which is to take the till. So, and that's the difference. It's about motivational differences there. The one guy does bad things. He feels that he's justified in doing them. The other guy is trying to do a bad thing, but he'll do a series of good things just to get in the position to do the bad thing.
So, Jeff, why do all of these archetypes work?
All right. And this is the opinion piece of the process here. But to me, I think the first thing that comes to mind is evil is very scary. And it seems stronger than good. So there's an attraction from most normal people to evil because they think it's easier, it's stronger, it's more accessible. But in a way, it works against our nature. And I think that's like a fundamental core thing that sticks in people's brains is because evil is more scary, we think it's stronger. So there's an attraction towards it, even if we don't want to partake in it. For most people, I think. Then I think we, being human, we also we sometimes do or think bad things. You know, it's like we'll think something bad, or we will actually do bad things. Sometimes we might not even admit to ourselves, but sometimes we do bad things on purpose because we think it'll make our life easier. We think it's only fair. You know, some of these things that we've talked about in a much, more narrowed focus of normal everyday life. Yeah, I took that piece of gum because you know what? That jerk is always over at my desk bothering me. He left his gum out and I needed a piece of gum, so he owed me that piece of gum. You know, I start to justify a bad action I know I took in my brain. And it's not that I'm a bad person.
Yeah, you are.
And I would try not to do that myself.
Sure you would.
Sometimes humans do bad things on purpose and we try and justify them to ourselves, and it makes anti-heroes and villains appealing because we see people struggling with morality the same way normal people like struggle with morality in their whole life.
My wife will eat if I have a treat, but she also likes my treat. She will eat my treats. It could be my ice cream or a candy bar, and she will justify it by saying something to the effect of, she knew she was going to enjoy it more, so she deserved it more.
That's anti-villain.
I'm like, that doesn't make it okay for you to have it. It was mine, and I was going to enjoy it, and now I can't, and you should go replace it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, yes, no, that was an anti-villain moment, just a moment, because she's not normally there, but that shows the truth, though. It's all of us, even the best people, and sometimes it would like maybe be in the circumstance of that where it's like, she might do it to Michael, but she might not do it to anyone else. But it's because of the strong bond of relationship.
Oh yeah, she wouldn't do it to someone else, just to me.
Exactly, because she's a very good person. But the thing is, even really good people struggle with morality. It's difficult to do what we think is the right thing because a lot of times it seems more difficult, which makes it seem weaker than evil. And that's why I think there's such an attraction to people to these characters. And I think if you had too many of these characters in a book or in a story, it would become way too cloudy with motivations and stuff like that. And too much time would be spent there. It'd be hard to pull that off with like 55 characters and they were all anti-heroes or villains. But, I mean, like I said, I think you could really, have one or two in a story, and really it helps bring people into it because it helps people start struggling with morality the way you want them to struggle with morality over the entire story. And lastly, I think a lot of times we've seen good people or people who've claimed to be good do really horrible things. Really horrible things. And think about, it's like the classic example is, what would you do if you were in Nazi Germany and you were in the position to, where if you didn't do what the Fuhrer said, you would be killed, but you had to do something really horrible not to, basically to do what he wanted you to. Most people, I would believe, would say, I wouldn't do that. But part of them goes, I hope I wouldn't have done that. I really don't think I would have, but I've that circumstance is so extreme, I can't really relate. And it's a scary circumstance on any side of that equation, so, our brains are just always try and grapple and work through these things, which is how they work. And that's why I think these kind of characters seem so appealing if done correctly.
A big part of creating a character like this is motivation. We had, it went way back. It was a real early episode where we talked about differences between motivation and, what was the other thing? Was it intention versus motivation?
I forget. I don't even remember.
Oh man, it was a good episode, and we
did we mention it was like 200 some episodes here, folks?
It was probably in the neighborhood of the late 70s into the 80s, like really early on when I first came.
You started 79, so and that was Ant-Zombie Overlord. So I'll take a look to see if it's in the 80s, and if I can find it, I'll throw it in the show notes.
But the basic gist is we got to talking about the nature of motivation for a character. Mm-hmm. When it comes to their morality, whether they're going to do good actions or bad, you have to start talking about their motivation. Like, Jean Valjean is motivated to keep his sister living, so he stole the piece of bread. So, classic example of somebody, good guy, doing a bad action and, getting into trouble. But I love it when it's like, what actually makes the character good or bad? Mm-hmm. Let's say you got a guy whose nature is rotten. Like his nature, he wants to act on the most horrible of desires. He wants to murder and steal and pillage, but he doesn't because he knows it's wrong, and he sticks to his intention of being a good person. Mm-hmm. Is he a more moral person than the guy standing next to him, who is also a moral person? Because I feel that morality falls when it comes into context of a book and a story. It has to fall in action, not in the thought process beforehand, but what physically actually occurred. Mm-hmm. So you got the guy next to him who's a good man. And it's easy for him to be a good man because he's a good man. So he leads a similar life. Who's a better, more moral person? The guy who it comes to naturally, or the guy who is struggling against his nature the whole time? I would say it's the guy who's struggling against it the whole time because he knows he's bad, but he is fighting to maintain a moral facade.
Well, I think you just got a fundamental truth of when it's best to use these kind of characters. And if the themes of your stories are about this battle in human nature of good versus evil, which, as strong as evil seems, the vast majority of people don't do anything really bad to other people. And for whatever the motivations are, you hear about the percentage of people who do bad things. That's what we like to talk about. That's the exciting news story. But the vast majority never really do anything like on the scope of what we would call like criminally, legally wrong. So the interesting thing is when your story likes to, I think in war stories and in anything where there's a lot of violence and you're playing against the morality problem of, even as a soldier, if I kill someone else, does that make me bad? Or am I doing it because the reason of the war was right? But when you fight against the morality and say, I want to cloud up the issue and say, even though it seems right, am I really right? When you get into those sort of moral quandaries, anti-heroes and anti-villains make really strong characters to help really explore those ideas. I think even as not only as the antagonist or the protagonist, but like they're supporting characters. So maybe you have a protagonist who's like a platoon like guy fighting with what he's doing is right or wrong in a war. But then, I think the movie Platoon did this. And then they had the guy who went too far, who just started to enjoy the killing of people and did wrong things. So I think it's a great way to explore those tough moral questions.
Are you done with all of those the way they work?
Yeah, we are done.
Okay, great. I am going to hijack the real world.
Okay, so then I will do the Worldbuilding Task of the day, since I don't know your brain on what you're going to do with the real world. So for the Worldbuilding Task of the day, here on this Christmas day, if you're listening to it, the official rollout day, Merry Christmas. Now, go create a character on the edge, because you won't get coal for it because Christmas already happened.
Jeff's real world task of the day, still waiting to get started? ? Join the undercroft, start rolling in next year.
Mm-hmm. Join now and get ready to roll next year.
I'm going to point out, let's see, there was 3 that were in my head a minute ago, but I might not remember them now. What were we talking about? Was our last big talking point?
Using them as morality.
Yeah, there was to
help push the theme of morality.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I had 3 characters in my mind, and I was going to say, go watch this, and go watch this. Oh, go watch Europa Europa. That's definitely one of them. Excellent movie. French. Really messed up and scary. Not scary in a horror movie way. It's a war movie. And I had like 2 or 3 other properties in my head, but I can.
And there have been several dozens, at least, mentioned throughout.
Yeah. So. But I can tell the only reason I'm not remembering them is because my medication is starting to kick in, and it makes me foggy. So
excellent, or not excellent, but hey. But so we'll leave it as the secondary one, which is go watch Europa Europa.
Go watch Europa Europa. Great movie.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the myth rules hot.